Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Season 3, Episode 45, your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. So what's on tap for this week? Well, we have a double, an extravaganza, a smorgasbord, reflections on Season 5, episodes 5 and 6 of Fargo. Doing a little catch up from last week where we had a hour-long conversation with my buddy JB on the new David Fincher movie, The Killer. I do have some reflections on the fact that the Dodgers landed that ace pitcher from Japan, matching the Mets' offer of $325 million over the course of, I believe it's 12 years. I can sum that future piece up by saying, fuck the Dodgers. I'm sure that's not the last time I'll be saying that over the course of the next couple of weeks after I dive into the particulars of the deal, the structure of the contract. This is the last episode before the Christmas holiday. I wish you all a very Merry Christmas. To all my loyal listeners, thank you so much. To anyone new to the podcast, please like, subscribe, 5-star, thumbs up, write a review. If you know anyone that would be interested in such content and said content, please forward the podcast on to them. And if you like what you hear and you want to support, This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. Let's do this.
Act 1, Reflections on Fargo Season 5, Episode 5.
We can all fall victim to recency bias, and I'm no different. I'd like to think that I'm above it. Of course I'm not, because what I'm about to say is probably a product of recency bias. Episode 5 of Season 5 may be one of the best episodes of Fargo that I've seen to date. The episode was legitimately hilarious, and I actually had to go back and watch it a second time to see whether or not all of the humor that I thought was embedded in the episode was in fact meant to be humorous. As a series, Fargo can be qualified as a dark comedy. There are routinely, throughout every one of the seasons, comedic incidents that lighten up the mood of what is otherwise a very heavy, a very dark show. I don't know that there's ever been an episode, at least that I can remember, where it was pulled off so many times in the same episode and yet was so subtle and had so many homages to other Coen Brothers movies, part of the Coen Brothers universe, that it almost, you had to go back and have a double take. You had to watch the episode a second time, or at least I did. Maybe you, dear listener, picked up on all these things on the first viewing. I had to go back and rewatch it and then place in my mind, oh, that was Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? That was Raising Arizona. And I want to go over that with you in this, my Season 5, Episode 5 Reflections. Now, I don't believe that it was meant to be in every segment. The voiceover, the narration, like we're watching a wildlife documentary, had several parts that simply because of the juxtaposition to what was going on in the episode, it was tongue-in-cheek. I won't say that it was necessarily comedy. It was certainly tongue-in-cheek, and I like that. I also like the play on Dot being qualified or called a tiger, referred to as a tiger with the last name Lyon. And I'm not the only one who's noticed this. You could say that there is a play between the mother-in-law, Lorraine Lyon, being a quote-unquote lion, being a metaphor for a lion. And here you have her daughter-in-law, who at first glance to the family appeared to be very meek, just like the husband, a very unthreatening presence, and yet is secretly, as she's called by Lorraine Lyon herself, a wolf in sheep's clothing, but more appropriately probably referred to as a tiger by Ole Munch. I feel the episode vacillates between the storyline of Dot Lyon being the tiger and then Lorraine Lyon being the lion, and the humor that's involved with both of those characters. Lorraine more so outwardly, caustically, as part of her personality. She has a very sharp, biting wit that usually hits someone to their core and tears them down that way. And you've got Dot, who more in a circumstantial way has these comedic things happen to them. And this is reflective It's an homage to both Oh Brother, Where Art Thou and Raising Arizona. Two of my favorite Coen Brothers movies and quite hilarious movies. So where do we start? Well, Dot has to escape a mental institution that she's been committed to by Danish Graves, and in doing so, when she's walking out, she has taken someone else's ID. The woman that comes in to the room, a coworker, recognizes that she's wearing somebody else's ID, and she has to escape by running out the door. And I thought it was hilarious. I started laughing. The woman basically says, "Hey, you're not whoever." I think the woman's name was Mary. Whatever. So she says, "You're not person X, you're not Mary." And she says, "Oh, I'm new here." And then she begins to run out of the door. And the guy who's standing next to the woman who identifies that Dot isn't not, in fact, this person, he's eating and he just continues to eat. And she has to give him that glare. And he's like, "Oh, yeah, I've got to go chase after this person." I thought that was hilarious. Cut then to Lorraine Lyon sitting at the restaurant with the two bankers who we've yet to be introduced to. And the characters that are these two bankers, they're basically cartoon characters, very reminiscent of some of the characters in Raising Arizona and very strongly correlated to characters from Oh Brother, Where Art Thou in their cartoonishness. And because they stay in character, in that cartoonish character so well, it makes the entire scene that much more believable. You're not suspending your disbelief. You're actually maybe taken aback, and yet you just fall back into the rhythm of the scene, as was illustrated when Lorraine challenged these two because Danish Graves was not with her, and she correctly assumed that they were more comfortable dealing with a man in negotiating any type of credit facility or bank financing, which is what they thought that they were coming to the table to discuss. The last time you were negotiating with a woman was for a Tijuana blowjob? Brilliant. When Lorraine is illustrating to these two gentlemen that she is the alpha and she orders for them, let me guess, gentlemen, I'm sorry, if recollection serves, she says, "Let me guess, boys, burger and fries." She orders what I can only imagine is a very expensive bottle of wine. I did not look it up. And then as she wraps up, she's not even going to wait for her food. She's not eating with these two clowns. She says, "Enjoy the wine." Now, one could argue that these two gentlemen are also reflected in some of the characters that were the principals in the original Fargo movie, and I wouldn't argue with that. What struck me immediately was the yes men in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou to the governor, and the FBI agents in Raising Arizona after Nathan Arizona is kidnapped. And speaking of which, you want to talk about an homage, here's Lorraine Lyon sitting in her house after the police officer comes in to ask her questions about why she had Dot Lyon committed in the first place. You have a practically line-for-line recitation from Raising Arizona. "I want Nathan Jr. found, and you were all in the one place in the state of Arizona that I know he ain't at." It fit perfectly in the universe of Fargo Season 5. It was a great homage. I went there immediately, laughed out loud, had to rewatch it to realize the gravity of it, the depth of it, the way it was weaved in there and came out of nowhere. Then you have the FBI agents in Fargo Season 5. A far cry from the FBI agents in Raising Arizona. These agents, though, did have their little comedic turn when Dot pretends to hyperventilate in the face of the orderlies now looking for her. The male FBI agents read on her being that she was glad that she got caught. She's tired of running. And then she jumps out of the window of the women's room. Tired of running, huh? Now, this isn't Judd Apatow style humor. These are little twists, little turns, little sleight of hand given what's happening in the episode. But it works. This is how you create a dark comedy. If the viewer sees it coming, it takes away from the magnitude, the gravity of the scene, because all of these actions are not leading up for a punchline. The punchline is ancillary, and that's why it can be so effective. Another little twist that brought in a nugget of humor in light of what was a very heavy scene was the police officer, Indira, I believe that's her name, Indira, and Dot sitting at the kitchen table, Dot pleading with this woman to watch her daughter because she has to go out and right the wrongs that are levied against her. And her daughter, she can't watch her. She doesn't feel that she'll be safe because she's probably going into the heart of darkness in order to take care of what is all of these different loose ends that she has. Namely, I think that she's going to go and address this relationship with one Roy Tillman. That's just my speculation. And there's this looming question as to whether or not this police officer, a person sworn to uphold the law, is in fact going to harbor her as a fugitive and her daughter as a missing person. The plea made by Dot that she'd been battered, she'd been beaten, that she had to run away from this abusive husband, and that led her to go to this safe haven that is her current husband. And these people who were so violent toward her in the past, well, they haven't turned over a new leaf. This is an outstanding question. And in the conversation that she has with her husband who enters the scene, she says that yes, in fact, she is going to watch the daughter, that this woman sitting across the table from her is some woman from a church potluck. And then you have what I thought was a hilarious line when the guy who presents as a space cadet, right, completely in the universe of his own, that is his progressing golf career, an actual kid? There's an actual kid in our house? Given the weight of Dot's revelation and the way that it was presented, that it was set forth, it's believable. This isn't one of those situations, at least in my mind, where Dot was misrepresenting her past in order to deceive, or on the opposite end, even to protect the people around her. She was coming clean with this woman because she realized, this woman having just come clean to her, the whole debt situation, that she wasn't going to get what she wanted unless she was willing to trust someone, that she was willing to be honest with someone. We learn a lot about the two female characters, what I believe we can now call the protagonists of the television program, both Lorraine Lyon and Dorothy Lyon. We learn a lot about each one of these characters in this episode. And I'll say that Lorraine Lyon, in many ways, is the protagonist of Season 5. And this is going to be maybe a controversial take. I don't care. This is what a good storyline promoting feminist characters looks like. They're both feminine in their presentation, and yet it's a feminist, a very pro-woman message that's being conveyed in the episode and now as part of the storyline of the television show. These are very smart, very crafty, very creative, very powerful female characters. Both of them have been underestimated by men. It appears, at least from what we learn in episode 5, all of their lives. And as we are going to learn, as was set forth in episode 6, that's right, little spoiler alert, both of these women have stared down, that's probably the better way to say it, have stared down adversity and overcome it. And not from the help of some man, they had to do it themselves. More on that in the reflections on Season 5, Episode 6, which is forthcoming. I was a little disappointed that there was no Uli Munch in this episode, although I recognize that in telling this type of story, you can't have every character have a focus in every episode. We didn't know as much about Lorraine Lyon in episodes 1 through 4, and we're really learning a lot about her here in episode 5, and I think that you have to do that throughout the course of a 10-episode miniseries in order to fully flesh out not only the backstory of each character, their development, but then to have what would be the character arc in the last 2 or 3 episodes. I did watch several times the interaction between John Hamm and Jennifer Jason Leigh, the Lorraine Lyon character and the Roy Tillman character. I thought that both of them, they were so brilliant in that scene together, that they embodied their characters so well, and they embodied who their characters would be in interacting with one another. The fanboy in me hopes that's not the last time that those two characters interact in that kind of intimate capacity. And I was about to finish this reflection segment, and another no-show that I made a note of was Whit Farr, the black North Dakota State trooper, who I know is still going to be a part of this storyline. He didn't have any kind of thread in episode 5 whatsoever, so that'll be interesting to see how he works his way back into the picture, given that the FBI is now front and center in their investigation into Roy Tillman and the events surrounding Dot's kidnapping and the house burning down. On to Reflections, Season 5, Episode 6.
Act 2 Reflections on Fargo Season 5, Episode 6. The Tender Trap.
With each successive episode, I feel this show is getting smarter and smarter, and the plot is getting more nuanced and more developed. And I feel that I can reiterate a point that I made in the last segment, that this show is an example, is that beacon of light in what is an otherwise dark and mysterious and, unfortunately, the desperate tunnel that is woke Hollywood, its depiction, its portrayal of strong feminine, of strong female characters. Each one of the Fargo seasons had what you could call this evolution of a certain type of character. Now, sometimes this was based in ethnicity. Sometimes it was based in what we could call your plain and simple stereotype. In season 1, you had the Lester character, very similar to Wayne Lyon in the current season. This meek, this, I am loath to use this word because of its connotation now in popular culture. I believe it fits, though. This beta-type male that is transformed over the course of the season. Now, in the current season, the Lester character in season 1 was transformed into what you could call an alpha. This Lester character in season 5, at least up until this point, is in this still beta state, and even more so after the electrocution. In subsequent Fargo seasons, you've seen the rise of the Jewish mafia, the Italian mafia, the Irish mafia. You've seen an evolution of a Native American gangster. You've seen the evolution of a black crime family. I believe now we are seeing the evolution of this female character, this strong alpha female character that woke Hollywood should take a lesson from. I mean, all of these different Marvel characters they've come out with, these DC characters, all of these different types of movies where they've tried to take older stories that were beloved by people of my generation and older and tried to interject some kind of DEI, some diversity, equity, and inclusion storyline. You've seen this with Amazon and the Lord of the Rings. One of the biggest problems is that the storylines are simple, stupid even. I don't think that that's a far cry to call some of these storylines stupid. Ultimately, the story has to work in service of its overarching attempt, which is to entertain us, which is to help us suspend our disbelief for a certain period of time, that we buy in to what these storytellers are trying to sell us. I haven't really made a lot of comments on woke Hollywood and some of the stories they've been putting out, just to say that most of the stuff that Hollywood puts out is trash anyway, that in an attempt to try to make women the central part of any story and to fail miserably. I don't think that that's so out of step with what Hollywood is and has been for a very long time. What we really want as consumers is the same thing that we want from referees in sporting events. We want them to practically be invisible. We want them to have a presence because they're necessary. We want them to be invisible because they aren't the focus of the story. Episode 6 is starting to tie together some of these storylines, and I believe doing so effectively, strong female characters and the way that they're demonstrating not only their strength but their vulnerability, their humanity. It fits within the universe of the story. Their character arc is progressing the overall story, and it's not heavy-handed. It helps that the writing is brilliant. It helps that the actors portraying these characters do so effectively. I don't feel, and I'm not sure about you, dear listener, that there's this I am woman, hear me roar, this simplistic theme that runs throughout the course of these episodes. And to that end, the name of this episode being The Tender Trap, brilliant. Absolutely, it's so smart, it's so clever that you know that no one who's ever owned a strip club could come up with something that smart and clever to call their strip club. The name of the episode is The Tender Trap, and the episode opens with a strip club called The Tender Trap. Tender, right? We're going to take your money. You're coming in here with sex on your mind, and you're not going to get any, and you're going to walk out with a hell of a lot less money. What was the old Chris Rock bit? There's no sex in the champagne room. I believe he actually turned that into a song. Anyway, I digress. The Tender Trap is the overall theme, in my mind, of this episode. The money trap. That there are these characters that we've gotten close to because we believe we know their backstory. Now we're seeing how money plays a role in each one of their lives. I'm going to try to touch on that as well as all the other things that I noticed in the episode that not only brought moments of humor that were throwbacks to other elements of the Fargo universe. We open the episode with what I thought was a hilarious call from the collection agent, very likely a message. This call ends in the collection agent saying, give me 5 stars for the service, while having what you'd call that Minnesota nice threat that, hey, if we don't get the kind of cooperation we're looking for, namely you're giving us some money, this is going to litigation. You're going to get sued for the amount of money that you owe. And oh, by the way, please give this call 5 stars for customer service. Roll that into the interaction that our protagonist, and I've used that word for Dot, I've used that word in a way for Lorraine, and now I'm using that word, that moniker, that characterization for Indira, the police officer, who, out of all of the female characters, very likely is closest to what we would call a protagonist, having to deal with her man boy of a husband who she clearly loves, and yet it's one dream after another. And I think the way she puts it in episode 5, that he's just not quite tall enough to reach any of them, it summarizes the guy perfectly. And yet in this scene, we see how this character is very similar to the Roy Tillman character. We want all of the reward, all of the accolades without any of the responsibility. And as Lorraine succinctly says in episode 5, you want to be the baby. You were fighting for your right to be a baby. If you were to line up the two characters, the police officer's husband and Roy Tillman, they would look like complete and total opposites. Tillman being this quote-unquote alpha male, and again, I don't like using those terms, but for the sake of this podcast, for the sake of being succinct, I think they fit. This alpha male, someone who outwardly projects strength, and then contrast that, and I use that word specifically and intentionally, contrast that with the husband of the police officer. You'd think they're completely different because this is someone who is not portraying themselves with this outward confidence. In fact, this person has somewhat of a defeatist attitude and yet is looking for the kind of positivity that is required of a winner, not from within himself, it's from his wife. He is looking for unconditional support in whatever endeavor he engages in, regardless of his level of success. And he wants that without having to contribute anything to the person who is providing that type of support. So he's basically looking for a mother that will have sex with him. Tell me I'm wrong. He's looking for a mother figure, someone who will support him unconditionally, love him unconditionally, and yet will also meet his physical needs. And those needs, at least what I interpreted out of this episode, are not being met. I thought it was strange that when telling Scotty, the kid, that he's going to physical therapy, he puts on cologne to go see his physical therapist. I think the episode, and I think the series is setting you up for this guy is very likely cheating on his wife, this Indira character, with the physical therapist because he's not getting the kind of support at home that he believes he is entitled to. And there are more nuggets, there are more kernels to be gleaned from this episode. Fargo is a very interesting show in that there are things that will go unexplained as part of the story, and yet there are other things that are indications of things to come. That if the viewer is paying attention, is playing chess, not checkers, the show is actually telling you what direction these storylines are going to go in. One of these indications in my mind is the overall financial stability of the Roy Tillman election campaign, and perhaps even Roy Tillman himself, his own personal financial situation. Let's cut to the scene where Tillman is talking to Gator after having slapped his wife, a very unsubtle way of describing what the home life is like with one Roy Tillman. And there's the joke about his ear having been cut, looking like the Swede, looking like Ole. The two go out to the abattoir, as Gator described it, Roy having just seen a commercial with the person that he believes is going to be sitting there, Dot's new husband, and it turning out to be someone completely different. That was a very macabre scene where Roy just immediately shoots the guy in the head. And of course, because it's Fargo, that sense of realism associated with violence is always depicted. You have the disturbing final moments of this gentleman after he's been shot in the head. And then there was this cartoonish situation. Think about how violently, and I mean to use that word intentionally, how violently the mood went from disturbing, Roy Tillman slapping his wife, to comedic, the interaction between Gator and Roy Tillman, to violent again in a very macabre way, Roy shooting this gentleman in the head who he realizes is not the right guy. They don't have Wayne Lyon. And note the cue in the music. It goes from that kind of disturbing, macabre violence to, again, a slapsticky type comedy situation between Gator, Roy Tillman, and the ranch foreman. I didn't notice it on the first viewing. I noticed it on the second viewing that the reason why you have that somewhat lighthearted feel after such dark incidents with this character, the music is actually cueing you that way. Go back and listen to that music during that scene, and they're trying to take you down the path of the ridiculous. You needed that to get to what? To Roy Tillman wanting to make peace with the Ule character and Gator interjecting, and here's where we get back to the tender trap. Here's where we get back to the theme of the episode. Gator lets loose, we're not in the financial position anyway to be giving this guy money. What's Gator's actual words? I believe he says, we're already upside down and you're going to pay this guy. We should settle this with a bullet. You're going to hear me say this over and over again. Brilliant writing. This is how you lead the viewer down the path that there are financial problems in the Roy Tillman election campaign, and again, perhaps Roy Tillman's personal finances, that perhaps he's been giving too much money and too much time and his effort, not only to this Dot situation, but to this ultra right-wing militant situation where he's giving these weapons to this paramilitary group. He hasn't been focusing on his own personal finances and his election campaign. In Tillman's mind, though, what is he doing? I believe the next scene where you've got Ule and they're sitting there in front of these bulls that Tillman is contemplating buying, he's saying, he's illustrating, he's describing so that we, the viewer, get it, and in the universe of the show, the characters understand. Tillman is someone who goes by his gut, and his gut instinct was telling him that all of this bad luck stemmed from the fact that they tried to screw this guy, Ule. They couldn't do it. They tried to kill him. They couldn't do it. And now he wants to set that straight. He wants to reconcile that ledger so that he can then enjoy all of the fruits that he expected to in his relationship with his father-in-law, the paramilitary, in his re-election campaign, and in his eventual, and I'll call it capture, that's probably the best word, in his capture of his prior wife, Dot. Don't think it was lost on me that when Gator puts the tracking device onto Ule's car, that the tracking monitor isn't the same tracking monitor from No Country for Old Men. If you remember that, this is what Anton Chigurh was using throughout the course of the movie to track the money there. Gator is using the same device. Now, I don't know if this is going to play into the whole tender trap. In other words, Ule is exposing himself in a way that he probably wouldn't otherwise do except for the money. Remember, Ule is a nihilist. He only does things for money. And Tillman points that out to him in the first episode. Now Ule has potentially exposed himself in his location to Gator and thereby to Tillman himself because he wanted to get that money. Now, the more adept of you who are as big a fanboys or fangirls of this show as I am might be thinking you've completely skipped the interaction between Vivian and Roy in the beginning of the episode. I wanted to get to here because I believe that we now have parts of a puzzle that are going to begin to come together in the last 4 episodes. Vivian comments to Roy outside of the strip club, "You got my check, right? For the re-election campaign." And then, of course, Roy shakes him down and says, "You're not selling your bank," to Lorraine Lyon. We then see Roy taking a big bag full of money, kicking it over to Ule and saying to him, "Now we're even." And then we see, and I want to progress to here, Lorraine getting Vivian's shirt and a note that states, "You're not going to win here. You're not going to get this bank, and I'm not going to allow you to get what you want until I get what I want. And you refused me what I want, so you're not going to get what you want. I wanted Dot. You said no. You want this bank. I say no." I would like to note that in the interaction with Danish, when Lorraine is going over the note and he's, "Well, we have the handwriting experts on it, and what do you think it means?" Lorraine is portrayed as the smartest person in the room every time she's in the room. Sometimes this is done subtly, sometimes it's done heavy-handedly. I believe in this scene that it was somewhat heavy-handed, that after having had the interaction himself, Danish and Roy, where Roy says, "You're going to see me again, but not in the way that you think," and then he can't put 2 and 2 together after he gets Vivian's shirt and a note saying, "Not on my watch," with a badge on it. That landed with a bit of a thud for me. Lorraine reminds me of Walter from The Big Lebowski, where the dude tells Walter, "Yeah, Walter, you're right. You're still an asshole." And she is routinely right, and she is routinely an asshole. What is Lorraine's edict in light of having received this shirt and this note? What is her instruction to Danish? We're going to go and steal an election. So in my mind, Lorraine already knows that Vivian is a large, if not significantly large, contributor to the re-election campaign for Roy Tillman, and that he is relying on that money from that bank in order to fund his re-election. And by removing that money out of the coffer, out of the till, she's thereby compromising Roy Tillman's re-election campaign. Now note, every time you see any kind of public or media image about that re-election, except for the billboards that Tillman himself has put up, it's that the re-election is heating up, that it's actually a very close contest. I speculate that Lorraine is going to reach out, either directly or indirectly, to Roy's competitor, the person that's running against him for that sheriff's office, and going to fund that person's campaign while crippling Roy Tillman's campaign in the last week before the election. This is certainly not spelled out, but you do see Danish present to the same strip club, the Tender Trap, while Vivian is there, so that he can have Lorraine on the phone tell him, "I'm ruining you financially." Playing chess, we see that Vivian, in the beginning of the episode, was a large contributor to the Roy Tillman re-election campaign. We see that the bank, because of the exposition between the characters in episode 5, is in financial trouble. We now have Tillman going back to Lorraine saying, "You don't get the bank," and Lorraine saying, "Okay, well, if I don't get the bank is no more. Financially, it's insolvent. I'll just have that out of the equation," thereby taking out of the equation the money Tillman was very likely relying on for his re-election campaign, money that he may have given, if not a large part of, maybe all of, to Ule to get him to go away. A number of comments that I want to make. I don't know how many of them I'm actually going to get into because this is starting to run long. I do love this relationship between Lorraine and Wink. That's Lorraine's husband. I'd like to figure out how they actually connected, what their backstory is. Wink being what presents as an alcoholic. I mean, sitting there in the FBI interview with his son, asking if they want a gimlet. It took me a second to put it all together that he had a glass full of liquor, and there he had a shaker sitting on the table that he could offer to these two FBI agents. And then the comments that he made were no more inspired or no more thoughtful than the comments that his son made, having not only been a very meek person, but having been electrocuted not 2 days prior. Again, playing chess instead of checkers, I'm wondering if the FBI agents are suspicious as to whether or not Indira, the Scandia police officer, is aware of Dot's whereabouts, of Scotty's whereabouts. And by way of the interaction of the characters in those scenes with the FBI agents, it's clear the agents do not care about Dot. She's a means to the end being getting Roy Tillman. And I am going to wrap it up here. I do want to talk about the scene between Indira and Lorraine, where Lorraine is dropping nuggets of wisdom, not only for someone in a position of perceived, that's the way I'll say it, perceived weakness. How does someone who is struggling, who is in a position of perceived weakness, begin to project that perception of power? And she has a couple of nuggets that she gives to the girl, and it sounds like that she's saying them in a very derogatory and a negative, in a cutting or condescending way, and yet I believe that this is part of the humanity of that character. She's saying these things to her authentically. Don't apologize for something that you didn't do anything wrong for. After having offered her a job, don't go ask for permission. Don't ask your husband. She may have that type of attitude because of the relationship that she had, again, with her husband in the beginning of their relationship, and the fact that it may very well be that she built the empire on her own two shoulders while her alcoholic husband was just riding coattails. We also see the humanity of this police officer character of Indira, that she does have police instincts, that she has insight, and that she sees that both Lorraine and Dot are probably the two closest aligned characters in this entire Fargo universe, that they are very much alike, and that in that moment, Lorraine not only recognizes as much, she may recognize that this woman who's bringing to her this type of insight is also of the same vein, is cut from the same cloth. Lorraine gives away as much by saying, hey, I'm offering you this job, a white-collar job. You get the opportunity to be the boss of a number of men who very well may look down on you. You get out of debt, and you are questioning whether or not you want to take it. If you don't take it, you certainly aren't anything like me. Put that into perspective. We see that Dot got herself out of a situation and into a much better situation when the opportunity presented. I believe we're going to get some of that backstory on Lorraine, and here we are seeing how this Indira character can do the same thing in what we as the viewer and she as the character had no expectation of. It was completely out of the blue. And in the universe of the show, I don't believe that when that officer walked into the room, Lorraine was in any way, shape, or form going to offer her a job, and yet that's what happened. And so when she's walking away and she says, thank you, didn't think you'd be saying that to me at the end of this interaction, did you? That's truly how the world works. That these windows open up to you, these windows of opportunity, and if you don't capitalize on them, they close very quickly. That it's coming from a female character in the way the story is unfolding, in my mind, is brilliant. This is, again, how you create a very strong female character without slapping the viewer across the face. You could have interjected male characters into the same type of scene, and it's less about whether or not it's male or female, and it's about the power dynamic. It's about people with less power understanding how power is actually obtained and then brokered. I could gush on about this show for another 10, 15, 20 minutes, but that's just going to be 10, 15, or 20 more minutes that I'm going to have to edit, so we're going to cut it off here. I am excited about getting to episode number 7 next week. This episode will be published on December the 23rd. To each and every one of you, I wish you a happy holiday, a Merry Christmas, and I will see you. We will visit again before the new year. This is Why Don't Vote, a podcast.